Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode on season 3 of the Part of the Pros podcast. For any new listeners just tuning in, this is a podcast series where I sit down with some of the most talented and successful execs in sports and entertainment. We learn about the journey so far, the path to success in sports business, as well as career-related industry topics. Today, I'm sat with Zack Rose. Zack is the Senior Vice President of Endeavor Analytics. Zack, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Of course. I'm excited to get into today's discussion. We've got a lot to cover. We'll dive straight into it, Zack. I guess question I always like to kickstart these things with. Take us back to I guess, your early days. One thing I actually didn't realize, which I noticed as I was doing some prep work here, is you've only worked for 2 businesses, which is almost unheard of these days when we're talking to people that are at the level of seniority that you are. So I'm intrigued and I'm excited to learn more about that. But bringing it back to the question, talk to me about your first journey into the world of entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been incredibly passionate about sports and entertainment in general. Grew up playing sports at a youth level. After I realized, I didn't quite have the athletic prowess or capabilities to make it to the pros, I figured I should probably pivot that dream and take it more into the business side of things. So started my career at Warner Brothers. I'm very passionate about entertainment in general. Loved the company, actually. In fact, my uncle had worked there, and he kind of got me turned on to it when he had started eons ago. But I've always just really had a passion for that, had a knack for numbers and analytics throughout high school and college. So it kind of seemed like a natural fit. Really actually just got into the business because I heard it was a really good foundational starting point working in, data and analytics. And kind of continued to thrive and grow and actually turned into just a genuine passion for it. And, here we are today. Yeah, to your point, 2 companies in and still employed, so I'll take it.
This is and we're talking about a time here, Warner Bros, early 2000s, right? So I'm a huge Batman fan. We had the Batman Forever, we had Batman and Robin in the kind of late 90s.
Yeah.
What was that kind of like, I guess? You mentioned that you were obviously a fan from a personal standpoint, right? In the world of entertainment, in the world of media. How did you kind of find that transition? Or you get a job, you land a job with Warner Bros, and obviously, this is one of the most recognizable conglomerates in the world of media and entertainment. How did you kind of find that first taste of, okay, I'm now converting something that I'm personally passionate about into a professional career?
It was really, really cool. And I think what was unique about Warner Brothers, I'm obviously based out of Los Angeles, so they have their studio in Burbank. And so one of the perks of being an employee is you get to walk around on the lot. For those maybe familiar with hopefully the hit sitcom Friends, there's the Central Park Cafe, which is in the show. They actually have sort of, dare I say, a little bit of a pop-up there. So that's where you could go to get, your coffee or your Starbucks every morning. But you would run into talent on the lot. George Clooney was always there. That's when he was filming ER, and occasionally you go to the gym and drop some trays with him shooting basketballs and whatnot on the lot. But yeah, it was really cool to just walk around. I totally geeked out. You can kind of walk into some of the studios when they're open and kind of peer your head in, obviously as long as they're not filming, but that's what really I think made it a lot of fun. And then I think anything kind of to be successful is you have to be passionate about something. And so even though you're doing things like reporting on TV recaps or looking at, awareness, popularity of certain characters, if it's something you're passionate about, like, the DC universe, Harry Potter was also a huge franchise, and that was kind of, getting a lot of steam when I first started. So working on all of those franchises, I think was a lot of fun and made it, really much more enjoyable to come into the office every day.
Yeah. It's a lot of people, at least a lot of people that I know and have spoken with, they have that first flavor of what it's like to work in an industry that is such a global has such a global interest, I guess is a better way of putting it. Um, Sports, media, entertainment, all of these areas, we're talking about fans, we're talking about consumers. And that first flavor of what it's like to be on the business side of it, it's very easy to almost take a bit of a, off the grid, off the beaten path route, and you start embedding yourself into the excitement of what you're involved in, rather than actually thinking, hey, you know what, I've got a job to do at the end of the day. I mean, from some of the research I was doing, you were working on things like the DeGeneres show, Two and a Half Men. It's
Yeah.
very, very easy to be sidetracked by some of those things. I guess, what was it for you that really kind of kept you grounded in those situations where, yes, there was all of this excitement going on, and this is your first, professional job out of college, and you're in, you're walking down and seeing these celebrities and big names in the industry, to really kind of, spend 7 years there and work your way up to where you are now, which we'll come on to in a moment.
Yeah, no, I think just always just like the idea of like working hard. I mean, that was something that my parents kind of always instilled in me as a kid, is to kind of keep me grounded. I think also having a lot of friends and family constantly putting you in check is helpful. But at the end of the day, while it's obviously something that I feel privileged to work at, a place like Warner Brothers and Endeavor, it's still a job, and you got to do it. And I think one of the things, we talk with a lot of our young analysts, here, is it was just hyper competitive, because a lot of people also wanted to be in that position. They wanted the job. So you really had to work hard. And I mean, it was, regularly over 12-hour days, just to kind of get ahead, or in some cases keep up. And I would say it probably wasn't always the sharpest tool in the shed, so just had to work harder. And that's really, I think, what kept me going. Obviously the passion for it and the interest in the content and the IP, but then getting pushed as well. And I think that's where kind of the sports side of it comes out of, always wanting to compete. When you have a lot of smart people around you and others competing, and then obviously, there's a lot of pressures. Warner Brothers was a publicly traded company, still is. So, you have shareholders. And so, you're constantly reminded that this is a business, and like, yes, it's fun, and you're here to enjoy it, but it's about, making money at the end of the day for the company. So,
Yeah, there's a phrase which I'm sure you've heard and everyone has heard of, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I think that could not be more applicable in the industry that we work in, because everyone wants to work in the industry, and usually the talented folks are the ones that end up landing the big jobs, or the early stage jobs that really define their careers. And I speak to so many people that say that exact phrase. I wasn't the brightest spark in the room, but one thing that I knew that I could control was how hard I worked, and then the hours that I put in. And I don't think that's just a sports and entertainment thing. I think in any career, if you want to really be successful, especially in those early days, that first kind of 5-10 years, you really need to put in a shift. And that's not just working 12-hour days, that's working smart. It's not being sidetracked by some of these things that we just spoke about, and really honing in your attention and focus to be able to succeed in a very competitive environment.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's something that we push, a lot of our younger team members here, especially, is that, great, fantastic, you got your masters, you're brilliant, but you gotta still grind.
I hear you on it all. And talk to us about Endeavor then. So this is, Endeavor, we're talking again, one of the largest conglomerate media businesses in the world. And not sure whether this is an opportunity that you were kind of, out there looking for. Just talk to us about that initial, interaction or engagement that you had with Endeavor, and how that came about.
Yeah, no, and I think if I could give any sort of piece of advice, especially to, like, if there's any younger, folks kind of tuning in, I mean, and my dad always kind of told me this, is you never know who your next boss is going to be. So with your colleagues, get along with as many people as you can, because you never know when you might need them. And um, my when I was an assistant at Warner Brothers, my boss, he had left to, and at that time it was Endeavor, excuse me, before even the William Morris acquisition. It was, essentially a pure talent agency, but we had done a lot of work at that time with the UFC, a little bit with WWE as well, which we'll, I guess, come to later in terms of like full circle. But Um, he was like, and this is, I'm kind of laughing and I'm dating myself a little bit because this is when digital was really starting to take off. Live streaming was like not really a thing. It was just sort of like streaming of some content. And then it was more like on websites, like you mentioned, the Ellen DeGeneres TMZ, or all stuff that I was like working very closely with when I was at Warner Brothers. And, he's like, hey, we're kind of like getting into digital here and we're doing some cool things. Maybe you want to come over and check it out. And I was just really enamored by the entrepreneurial spirit of it. Working, with the talent, I think, and then this is kind of where I got my first taste of like sports, of again, UFC, WWE, PBR, and working a little bit with athletes as well from the representation side. So it was sort of like this, perfect package of, you got something that's incredibly entrepreneurial in spirit. It's a growing company. You also have, the entertainment, which is really kind of my foundation and major passion point, and then sports. So it was just like, you know what, great, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. Roll the dice, and here we are today.
And so you joined Endeavor 14 years ago. What was the first role that you took there?
Sure. Yeah, when I came over, the first request I got was, ironically, it was an entertainment-oriented request, and that was for the show. It was called People's Court. It's essentially it's a early form of non-scripted show. People are going in and talking about their legal problems, but the irony of it is it was actually a Warner Brothers show. So I leave Warner Brothers, come to Endeavor, and I'm getting sort of the same type of request. It was kind of ironic, but that's what really kind of got me out of the gate. And then there was probably thousands of projects after that that continued to flow. But again, I think the cruel irony, or not the cruel irony, the irony of it was that, going, from sort of one spot to another, but it was a pretty easy transition.
Were you working quite closely with the Warner Bros. Folks as well? Because I feel like sometimes in those early transitions, you often find it, I don't know, an organization absorbs another business or there's a merger or something. And whilst you make that transition, I think you touched on it just then, it's a relatively easier transition to make because you've got the relationships, you know how the business operates, you know the processes, all of that sort of stuff. Would you say that was, I guess, advantageous to you walking into that role?
Yeah, I think it was really helpful. I mean, at Warner Brothers, I was dealing with a lot of sales guys. I mean, a lot of our job was really helping get shows picked up for another season, sold in a new market or region. And coming here to Endeavor, I mean, agents are essentially sales guys. So the personalities, characteristics are very similar. So it was helpful. And then to your point, in some cases, kind of ironically, we'd be doing deals with the studio. So in some cases would be, hopping on phone calls, helping close a deal on our side for talent with some of those people, who I'd worked with years ago. So it was a pretty natural transition. I think the biggest thing, again, and what I loved so much about the company when I first got here, is really the entrepreneurial spirit. It was kind of like, hey, just run with it. Even my former boss, it wasn't quite as much like cookie cutter with the output of work. He's like, I trust you, just go do it, do your thing. And the entrepreneurial spirit of Endeavor was immediate. To see that and to be able to kind of do your own thing, especially with research, is really fun.
So one of the things that I'd love to dive into today, Zack, is something that you've actually mentioned a few times there as you were talking, the athlete representation side of the business. I guess before diving into the weeds, would love for you to just provide any listeners that maybe aren't aware of some of the initiatives that Endeavor Analytics are currently running and undertaking to support athletes who are interested in entering the entertainment industry, or maybe who are already in the industry, and looking for some more exposure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think from, where we sit, we work, in lockstep with the agent team, and a bit with the athletes as well. But I think the first thing is really understanding, what they want to do. So, usually there's, some brainstorming of ideas, just kind of they get floated around. And then where we really come in, from an analytics standpoint is, helping sort of identify those organic swim lanes. So, hearing if a talent's really passionate about, a particular genre, or, hey, I really want to launch, a production company. And it's then kind of taking, what their passions are, aligning that with their fan base and what we're seeing with consumers in general. And then once we sort of have, sort of that organic alignment, it's really kind of fleshing out the narrative, using more data points to kind of round out the story. And then it's, a bit of like mixing, the art and science, taking a little bit of, what, we're hearing from the talent themselves, the agents, and their ability to kind of narrate, and then obviously overlaying that with a lot of the data to sort of hammer those points home, and make sure that we're putting the athletes at least in the best position to potentially succeed. That, hey, this is sort of the right path that you should be going down.
And so is it almost acting as the data, the analytics, helping them with some of the decision making parts of what they're trying to achieve, rather than the ideation or the creation of what they're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, sometimes, you'll have, I think it depends. What we really try to do is rely as much on the data as possible to guide them and say, like, hey, like it's this is your audience and this is your fan base. And I think one of the things is a lot of these athletes are pretty savvy now. Obviously they leverage social media, so they sort of have their own platform and are pretty familiar with sort of who their fan base is. But where I think, again, the analytics can kind of come in is kind of giving a little bit of a okay, aha moment or something a little different. And more on sort of the sports property side, but a really good example I think of that is the UFC. When the UFC was emerging, there was sort of this perception that you're reaching a you know old young male, excuse me, driving a pickup truck, and in sort of the Midwest or whatever it might be. And it turned out that, as we started doing more analytics, we find out, okay, there's actually, a much broader consumer fan base. There's also an emergence, with, an interest in female fighters, and, a growing composition of women viewers, of, Black and Hispanic viewers as well. So that's where I think sometimes the data didn't come in play. And similarly with the athletes, is sometimes, while they have a pretty good understanding, they might see like, oh, okay, actually, I'm resonating with this particular audience segment, and this aligns with platform X or whatever that may be. And so again, that's where I think the data can kind of help drive that.
It's interesting. A few different kind of areas that you touched on there. You obviously naturally see a lot of this in sports business and entertainment business, the importance of data and analytics when it comes to making some of these decisions. What the strategic vision behind supporting athletes and helping them in building these entertainment businesses? Just talk to me about that, because I can imagine there would have been a situation at some point where we say, hey, look, we've seen this in the market. We think there's an area for us to be able to go out and support them. If we go out and do this, this is what we could achieve. Just talk to me a little about some of those kind of discussions and how that's progressed to where it is today.
Sure. And I think, one of the things that was really interesting when I came to this company is, the terminology of classifying talent as brands or IP. And I think it's always been sort of a conversation of sort of like the holy grail of finding, a talent, that is sort of like a true multi-hyphenate. I think an example of that is, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So I mean, I don't think like the strategy is too complicated. I mean, I think we're rooted in just, I talked about being like an entrepreneurial organization, and we're really encouraged to take chances, think outside the box, bring ideas to the table. And so from an analytics, standpoint, number one, I think we're brought in early and often, which is great. And that's just sort of a byproduct of how I think senior leadership has encouraged the agents and others working in the organization to tap into us. But we sort of try and take that same approach of being a little cagey with the data we have to kind of help almost like even in some cases push some of that talent to say like, hey, by the way, like, you have an incredible fan base in gaming. Maybe you should consider, getting into doing something on the esports front or something like that, ultimately to amplify your presence, your awareness, your appeal. And I think, generally speaking, a lot of the talent, are open to that. And again, by being able to prove that like, hey, you actually have an opportunity here with data, I think it also gives them a little bit more confidence as well that, they could sort of maybe step outside a little bit of their comfort zone. But but absolutely, yeah.
You spoke a little about the kind of data there, but behind the thought process, it's not always a case of, hey guys, or Zach in this instance, I'm looking to launch a podcast, or I'm looking to launch a clothing line, whatever it might be. I need some support with how we go about this. Sometimes it is a case of, hey guys, this is what the data tells us. This is what
Yeah.
we think that you could be doing to really leverage your, your fan base, your connections, your followers. How, I guess, do you guys go about some of those situations when it comes to, because I can imagine there are also instances where athletes, they've got their ideas, they know what they want to do, right? And maybe they're just looking for a bit of clarity or a little bit of support in a specific area, but they've got their mindset. Is it a simple case of, well, hey, look, here's something that we can provide. If you guys don't want to run with it, no issues at all. We can support you in these areas. Or are you guys also trying to be a little bit more strategic in terms of some of the athletes that you do take on and represent when it comes to the actual execution of some of these projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think, sometimes it just kind of depends, on I think, where the athlete's head's at. And I think our agents could, probably speak a little bit better to that. But from like an analytics standpoint, a lot of times we're just sort of given a blank canvas, but a little bit of direction, kind of like, hey, they know they want to get into music, or they know they want to launch a podcast. Can you kind of help guide us, show us, one is there organic synergy, are there fans? A very common sort of starting point for us is showing, just using like the podcast example. Okay, are there fans even listening to podcasts? All right, great, check. All right, then where are they listening to podcasts? Is it Spotify, whatever. And then, we can kind of go a little bit further the road down there. Okay, like what genres are they really interested in? Check. And so then that's also maybe like a guidance on a little bit of the content, but also then we look at it from like a marketing strategy. So, okay, where can we potentially seed their content as well to know that, we can kind of build awareness, hopefully tune in appeal, whatever it may be. So it's all on that front. And then, in a perfect world, sometimes then on the measurement on the back end, right? Like once, something's got off the ground, okay, it's kind of keeping a pulse on it, making sure that it's performing well. We do that with actually a lot of podcasts of just kind of regularly reporting on the overall performance. All right, what content's working? This seems to have an impact. All right, this topic maybe not as much. So it's sort of like a holistic, support from kind of the idea phase to then actually, the reporting on the back end when something's live.
Do you have any specific metrics, I guess, that you assess specifically across all of these different? Because there's a lot to take on board, right? And there's a lot of different ways that you can, I guess,
Yeah.
assess what success means, what success looks like. How do we make this a success?
Yeah, sure. So, it mentioned, the Manning cast, for example. I mean, that's, linear television. So, again, we're looking at a lot of ratings, performances, benchmarking, you know, so that's pretty straightforward. SVOD's been a little bit more of a challenge. We have to get a little creative with some of the metrics we use, like looking at like hours viewed, per minute of content consumption, determining if there's been new subscribers. That's really a big one that a lot of the SVOD networks are looking at now, is sort of what sort of, I guess, halo effect, or what, are you able to bring in, and then have an impact and have more people tune in. So those are some of the key metrics, that we look at from, I'd say traditional to streaming media, social media buzz. We spend a lot of time looking at the online conversations of talent, whether that's, the sentiment, the perception, then kind of getting into, for lack of a better term, some of the harder metrics like the impressions, owned and earned media value. So we can then, kind of directionally put a dollar value against, the overall, impact that, maybe a talent's having, whether that be on a show or on a podcast. Looking at fan to brand alignment, that's, really a common, KPI. Again, is this, is a fan base of a particular athlete starting to tune in or maybe subscribing to this particular platform. I mean, we talked a little bit about Warner Brothers. When I started, it's just really interesting. Those KPIs were pretty straightforward. It's pretty much just looking at, linear TV ratings. And now it's just completely evolved. And there's so many different, benchmarks, different, metrics to use. And there's not really necessarily, this universal answer. Again, it used to really be like, oh, what is, the Nielsen number saying? And that's it. It's completely evolved. I think, it's become a little bit more rigorous, creating scorecards. So you had mentioned a couple of those KPIs. In some instances, we might pull a variety of those data points, apply some weighting, and, again, putting a little bit more rigor into the output through a scorecard. A lot more, benchmarking and comparisons. But yeah, I mean, those are probably the most common KPIs that we're using and that we're looking at.
It's interesting, very interesting. One of the things that we're, I guess, always cognizant of as a recruitment business, as an agency, the focuses on this market are, what are the emerging trends? What are the areas that we need to be thinking about, that we need to be, staying close to? How much of that do you guys get involved in? And it sounds like you do, from everything that you're saying there. But podcasts was probably one of the things in recent years that people started to jump onto. Now, every industry, there's 10, 15 different podcasts. I know about 4 or 5 other podcasts just similar to what I'm doing at the moment. So there's certainly, a need for a team or an individual, or however it's structured, to be thinking about what's the next best thing and how can we be one of the early adopters in whatever that thing is. Just talk to me about any kind of, whether it's your personal thoughts, whether it's something that Endeavor Analytics are focusing on when it comes to assessing emerging trends in the industry and then tackling some of those trends with the athletes that you represent.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you mentioned podcasts. I mean, obviously, like you said, I mean, it's probably, I'd say, pretty much mainstream at this point. But, that was something that, we've always been identifying and using as a little bit of a case study, if you will, and pushing candidly a lot of talent to try to get into podcasts. I mean, I do believe, that I think that it's the old saying, like, content is king, but distribution is emperor. I certainly do believe that the more you can get out there and the more exposure across whatever platform it is, the better. But podcasting is one that's really taken off. We're seeing a lot of athletes do it. I mentioned, Peyton Manning. They have Omaha Productions, which is his, production company, and they do a ton of podcasts, not only for themselves, but then they've also, grabbed other talents and other athletes as well. So it's something that I think is continuing to be a major trend. It's, I don't want to say evolving too much, but I mean, now you're seeing a lot of, video associated with podcasts. That's a major trend that we've seen. And anytime you can actually, it's kind of interesting. It's sort of like that, old is the new, I guess, of going back to video. Even though you have something that was sort of started as audio, the video of it and components, we've seen actually increases engagement with podcasts. So, when you're, watching something on YouTube, for instance, it typically has much higher engagement. Sports docus, I think there's been a lot of conversations that we've had on, like, all right, has the sports docu series, has that killed sports movies. I mean, if you actually kind of think about it, there haven't been a ton of sport movies. Again, I remember as a kid, I mean, that was, I think, a really like budding genre.
Yeah.
Not quite as much anymore. And I think a lot of that is obviously you've seen sort of just this massive wave of sports docus. And where I think we've seen success in a lot of what we kind of relay to to our clients with that is take Drive to Survive. I think a lot of people are like, all right, how do we get lightning to strike twice? Drive to Survive was such a huge hit with Netflix. They've kind of dabbled in other areas, had some success, some failures. But I think it's really also about not necessarily just the talent and are they popular? Of course, like awareness plays a factor, but I think what was really unique about that series, it was almost like it was like a drama or a soap opera. So I think and you didn't really have to know Formula One. You could just tune in and watch and get engaged. And so I think that was, I think really key to the success of that. And so again, I think we think, sports docus are really taking off. I had mentioned, not to shoot a dead horse, but mentioned, Manning and Omaha Productions. They had Quarterback, which was a wildly successful series on Netflix and very timely. Wide Receiver just premiered earlier this week, sort of the spinoff to that. But I think that's really an emerging genre that's going to continue to grow and flourish if kind of, again, done sort of the right way, we feel, and a little bit more of that drama and then getting kind of the right characters, I think is really important as well. And then I think just kind of more broadly, I kind of said it earlier. I think the more platforms and the more distribution, the better. I think SVOD, has really opened up the door. I mean, it's essentially just another, buyer, if you will. So I think, whether it be even like live sports, which, we're starting to see, obviously, these platforms get, more involved in, but I think that's something that really keep a lookout for, and we're really pushing SVOD. It's something that I think again, like you can't ignore the fact that there are a lot of viewers there and a lot of eyeballs, and again, it's simply just another platform to reach your fan base.
Love it. There's a few things that you mentioned there that I found quite interesting. I hadn't actually put two and two together and really thought about it, but you make a really good point on the fact that sports movies have died down, I guess, in the last decade or so. I think King Richard is probably the one that
Yeah,
springs to mind as the most recent, and that was what, 3, 4, maybe even years ago.
yeah,
I can't actually think of many others in the last sort of 5 years. I'm sure that there probably are, but maybe this is part of the point, right? Is that they used to be remembered, I think, of a Moneyball and movies like that that
yeah,
are just at the forefront of your mind when it comes to sports. The docuseries that you mentioned, just my thoughts there are, one thing that Drives to Survive done very, very well is, we're in the phase of things like Love Island taking off and, these reality TV series, and they
yeah,
just blended something that combined two different, types of consumers, and not to say, I'm sure there were people that are interested in both, but you've got a demographic that just loves the reality TV. You've got a demographic that loves sports. And when you combine those two things, it's entertainment at its finest. It's personality clashes and arguments and competitiveness, and that, in my opinion, that's why Drive to Survive was so successful. Others try to, I think, replicate it. Some of them worked, some of them not so much, and you can almost see that it was a bit forced, or the way that it
yeah.
was set up just didn't quite paint enough of a picture, enough of a story. So it'd be interesting to see how some of the conversations that you're having around SVOD over the next phase, if you like, of entertainment pans out. But yeah, it's been it's interesting to kind of look back and think of how content has changed in the last few years and what's becoming more popular versus what's dying out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I'm hoping that we start seeing, more sports movies.
Yeah, no doubt.
I
Big
totally
fans.
love that. And but yeah, I think you're right. Like you hit the nail on the head. I think it's that, docutainment or, of kind of mixing the best. So you're sort of pulling in, using an old term media term, of all four quadrants, right? Your males, over 25, males under 25, females, over 25, females under 25. So
Love it. Well, look, Zack, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure any listeners that have got to this point of the podcast, I'm sure I've also learned a lot as well. So thank you. I'm excited and looking forward to seeing what you and the Endeavour Analytics team continue to achieve. It's been a crazy few years, and I'm really excited for what's to come as well. So big thank you to you. For anyone listening that is interested in opportunities within the Endeavour Analytics team, I will be tagging Zack in the post here. I'm sure he's happy to help you out, redirect you where necessary. I know that they're a growing business with a lot of projects coming up. So yeah, like I said, Zack, thanks a lot for today, and looking forward to staying in touch with yourself and obviously the wider team.
Likewise, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity and time. Take care.
Of course. Thanks, guys, for listening.